Greetings and welcome there, academic proletariat, and welcome to this episode of the Fireside Chats, where we will be discussing the rise of big business in America during its Gilded Age. Now, we're watching this episode in preparation for a debate, so I'm going to try and remain as objective as possible. We'll see how that goes. To get this party started, let's go ahead and introduce you to the major industries and people that will drive the Gilded Age. So, what were these major new industries and their leaders? Let's start with Andrew Carnegie, pictured here, whose name you will probably recognize for being on so many fancy halls and music places and university libraries because, he had a lot of money. He was the leader of the steel industry. Cornelius Vanderbilt was a railroad magnate, particularly in the East. You might also recognize him because he has a university named after him. J.P. Morgan, whose name you'll undoubtedly recognize because, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. He was a leader of banking and finance, which should come as no surprise. Philip Armour, one of the lesser known guys, was a meat packer located in Chicago, specializing in pork production. John Rockefeller, the poster boy of the era, was the oil tycoon. Leland Stanford was another railroad guy. He was focused more in the West and contributed to the Transcontinental Railroad being built. You might also recognize his name because he has a university named after him. Gustavus Swift was another meat packer located in Chicago, specializing in beef. And finally, another Chicago boy, George Pullman, was a rail car maker. Okay, now that we have them under our belt, let's figure out where this industrialization came from. So if you recall, before the Civil War, America was largely agricultural. However, there was some early industry. It started in the home, but then eventually transitioned over to factories, seen specifically in terms of textiles. So if you recall, Lowell, Massachusetts was a textile manufacturing hub of America, and Francis Cabot Lowell's system of employing young women to work in the factories worked really, really well. However, once they were done working in the factories, they of course went home and then sort of took on the role of working, and this created a culture of separate spheres. The woman's sphere was the home, the man's sphere was the work, and so it had a profound impact on the way Americans lived. It also had a profound impact on the landscape, because in order for this industrial economy to work, you needed a lot of internal improvements, so we start to see these things being built. Okay, but relative to the Gilded Age, this is going to be small scale. I just wanted to give you an idea of where industrialism in America came from. Okay, now during the Gilded Age, which is roughly the late 1800s, early 1900s, there are three big categories of causes. So the first is geography. America has a geographic landscape that is prime for industrial development. We'll talk a little bit more about that why in a second, but if you're going to put this in terms of the AP US course themes, this would entail environment and geography. In addition to that, demography or peopling. America has a lot of surplus population, especially with the arrival of so many immigrants during the late 18 and early 1900s. And then finally, American law is set up to be business friendly. Despite what Ayn Rand might tell you, law helps. Okay, I can't take credit for this. I have to credit John Green in Crash Course. He gave me this little acronym, GDL, geography, demography, and law. These are three major causes of the Gilded Age. Now, let's talk a little bit more about specifics. So you can't have an industrial revolution without new sources of fuel, and that's exactly what happened. In addition to coal being mined throughout America, oil was also discovered during this time period, and oil will become eventually our major source of energy. During this time period, it's used mostly to fuel lamps in people's houses, not so much cars yet, but eventually it will come. In addition to that, there's a new process of making steel called the Bessemer process, which purifies the steel a little bit more than it had been purified before, and purified steel is good because it is stronger, therefore it's able to hold bigger locomotives and better trains. And in addition to that, we've already mentioned ample raw materials for growth, especially that of food. You know that America has amber waves of grain to feed a lot of people. Okay, I'm going to transition back here to the Bessemer process. I'm going to tell you really quick how it works. First you charge the scrap, then you charge the metal, then you blow it with oxygen, then you charge the fluxes, you test it, you tap it, you team it, and done. Get it? Good. Okay. In addition to those technical causes of the Industrial Revolution, let's talk about ones that were probably more relevant. First is urbanization. People moved to cities, as you can tell by this chart, after the Civil War in droves. Now, urbanization, how does that cause industrialization? Well, one, you get a lot of people to buy stuff in a small area. In addition, you get a lot of people who can work for you in a small area, and you sort of centrally locate your industrialization. That helps it work a little bit better. Transportation improvements also were important during this time period. You see better locomotives, you see the advent of rail cars, and so people are able to move more quickly and goods are able to move more quickly during the time period. In addition to that, you have communication improvements, particularly the transatlantic cable. So they dropped a telegraph in the ocean so that New York could talk to London. Now, this was especially important because if you're going to question how America rose during the Gilded Age, you have to ask, where did the money come from? Well, it of course came from England and the rest of Europe too. I don't want you to think it was just England, but mostly England. Why did it come from Europe? Well, Europe had already been built up. There wasn't a lot of economic expansion left in England. So what do when your money is burning a hole in your pocket or in your bank account? You try and invest somewhere else to make more money. So there was a lot of investment capital, particularly that European investment capital, available to be invested. And where did those Europeans put it? Well, they put it in America. Now, another idea that helped fuel the Gilded Age was this idea that the government should not involve itself in business. So America took on a very laissez-faire or business-friendly environment. This meant that the government was going to try and stay out of business affairs when it wasn't needed and protect and encourage business expansion when things might get in the way of big business. So, in other words, there's John Rockefeller, there's the White House, there's the Capitol building. Yes. Yes, entrepreneurs pretty much own the government. Okay, now how did things change in businesses themselves? These two terms are tremendously important. I cannot emphasize them enough to whoever is watching, so hopefully I do a good job of explaining them. All right, first is vertical integration. This is best seen with Gustavus Swift in the meat industry. If you're vertically integrating your business, it means that you are going to buy up all the production related to your product. So if you're going to sell a T-bone, you have to first get a cow, which means you need to have a ranch, and you need to get that cow from the ranch to the meatpacking industry, which means you have to own rail cars, and then you have to keep it cold, which means you have to own ice. So you own all of those things related to your industry. Now, this is different than what a monopoly is, or what we usually think of as a monopoly. That's considered horizontal integration. So if you think of a line, horizontal is all the businesses on that line that are all the same. So the oil industry is all on the line. John Rockefeller bought them all up. Vertical integration is not the same, like it's not all the same meat packing industries. Rather, it's everything involved in the meat packing industry. So here's a little image to help you. So if I'm going to produce meat, I'm going to start with the cattle. Okay, I'm going to own the slaughterhouse. I'm going to own the refrigerated rail cars. I'm going to own the warehouses. I'm going to own the packing plants. I'm going to own the delivery wagons. And I'm probably even going to own the butcher. That way I can maximize profit at every step along the way. Whereas horizontal integration means I'm just going to buy up every other oil refinery that is smaller than I am, and then I have all of them, which means I can control profit. Okay, so these two forms of business organization are tremendously important. Now, with regard to inter-business organization, or the organization between businesses, you started to see the emergence of two types of organizational forms. First being pools, and these were informal agreements between the companies to sort of divide their profits and split the market. So it was less public. Not many people knew that it was going on. It was sort of just the tycoons got together in a room where nobody knew that they were, and they made agreements and exercised control over the market. Trusts were much more open. So trusts were when boards, there was a board of trustees for a particular market, and owners of each business sat on the board and they made decisions, and they were the only ones allowed to make decisions, so smaller companies weren't allowed in. So now, important question, how did the government respond to this? Well, by doing exactly what the trusts wanted. So this is a very famous political cartoon, comes from Puck magazine. It shows you that all the trusts here, or the business owners, sort of oversee Congress and get them to do what the business owners want. Notice that the title of the political cartoon is The Bosses of the Senate. You kind of get the idea. Okay, now, just to remind you that the government wasn't totally sterile in all of this, they did pass one attempt to try and limit economic corruption, the Sherman Antitrust Act, which was an attempt to limit the power of trust and limit the power of monopolies. If a company, say Standard Oil, was found to be violating monopoly laws, then they would be fined $5,000. In 1890, John Rockefeller was worth $1 billion. What's a $500 fine to a $1 billion man? Nothing. All right, so to sum this all up, let's start right here. The Civil War ends, people move west, there's a need for a railroad. That's sort of all the stuff that really puts this in motion. Once there's a need for a railroad, you start to see the rise of corporations because railroads can't be built by individual men, so they need public money to do it. And so people put their money in the railroad and they become stockholders. Well, as time goes on, the people are more concerned about the money than they are about moral righteousness. So corporations end up running the government, which leads to social and economic inequality. In an age when most people owned or earned less than $1 a day, John D. Rockefeller was worth $1 billion. Just think about that. What does that say to me? Corruption eruption. That's all the time we have for today. Peace.